It was supposed to be a regular fishing trip, like every other morning in the village. Nelson, then just 17, had cast his net into the calm waters when the shadows of the slaver's boat loomed behind him. They moved quickly, overpowering him before he could scream. He was chained and taken far across the ocean, sold to a brutal merchant who reared dogs for the wealthy. His job was backbreaking, feeding the hounds, cleaning their waste, and enduring bites and lashes whenever something went wrong. The merchant treated him like one of the dogs, except the dogs were fed better. Though the dog merchant was a cruel man, his wife was different. She often watched the Nelson, silently as he walked, her eyes filled with pity. Whenever the merchant wasn't around, she would sneak him extra food or bandage his wounds from the dog bites and the beatings. "You don't belong here," she whispered one night as she handed him a piece of bread. "You're too young to waste your life in chains. If you ever find a chance to escape, take it and don't look back." Her kindness gave him hope, even as the days grew darker. Her words stayed with him, echoing in his mind until the day he finally found the courage to slip away. I watched him from the shadows of the lower deck, trembling. Nelson had the look of someone who had seen too much but said too little. He sat quietly, his hands on his knees, staring at the floor as if it held answers. I couldn't stop thinking about how he got here or why he stayed. It started when he came aboard 2 months ago. They said he'd begged the captain for a spot after the ship stopped near the port where the dog merchant lived. "I care for the dogs," he'd said. "Better than anyone else can." The captain didn't trust him at first, said he was just another runaway. "We don't take charity here," he backed. But then Nelson knelt right there on the dock, whispering something to the merchant's snarling hounds. They calmed instantly, tails wagging. That was all it took. Nobody asked much about where he came from, but I pieced it together. He'd been taken from his village while fishing, dragged far across the ocean, and sold like he wasn't even a person. He worked for the dog merchant, cleaning, feeding, and keeping the animals alive. That merchant was cruel. Everyone knew it. If a dog bit you or got sick, the blame was yours, and punishment came swiftly. Still, Nelson survived. Every night, as the hounds howled and the waves whispered outside the kennel, he would think of his family. His father's stories by the fire, his mother's songs in the morning. And his younger siblings' laughter haunted him like dreams he could never reach. He often whispered prayers to the stars, hoping they would guide him home. Until one day, he couldn't take it anymore and slipped away when no one was watching. When he finally escaped the merchant and convinced the ship's captain to let him aboard, his heart swelled with hope. But as the weeks passed and the ship drifted farther from the familiar, he realized home was slipping further away. He thought the sea could take him home. Now, here he was, on this ship, far from everything familiar. Except he wasn't thinking about home anymore, not since he met her. Zito, the sailor's daughter, whose kindness stood out in a world that had been so cruel. Zito, the captain's daughter. She served drinks on the ship and cleaned the cabins. She wasn't like her father. She smiled at Nelson, spoke to him when no one else did. Asked questions about where he was from. Slowly, they became close, sitting together on the quiet nights when the sea was calm. At first, I thought he'd leave as soon as we reached the next port. The crew assumed he was saving his pay to find a way back. But the closer he got Zito, the less he talked about going home. He started helping her with her chores, fixing things on the ship, staying up late to make sure the dogs were settled. "You're not thinking of staying, are you?" I asked him one night. He shrugged. "I don't know if I have a home to go back to." That's when I realized he wasn't just running anymore. He was building something. But the ship wasn't safe. Life on board was hard. Storms came often, and the crew was rough. I saw the way some of them looked at him, like he was still just cargo. Zito tried to protect him, but there was only so much she could do. Over time, their bond deepened, and against all odds, they fell in love. Their bond grew quietly amidst the chaos of life at sea. One evening, under a clear sky filled with stars, The crew gathered on the deck for a simple but heartfelt ceremony. The captain himself, reluctant but proud, officiated as Nelson and Zito exchanged their vows. The waves lapped against the ship's hull, and the dogs, his constant companions, barked as if in celebration. Though there were no grand feast or fine clothes, the joy in their eyes made it a moment he would cherish forever. In that small, floating world, they had created a new beginning together. They married quietly, with only the waves as witnesses. One night, Nelson came to me, his voice low. "Do you think I made the right choice?" I didn't have an answer. It wasn't my place to say. All I knew was that he looked different now, stronger, maybe, but also heavier, like the sea was swallowing him bit by bit. He stayed, though. When we docked at a port not far from his homeland, he didn't even look back. Sometimes, I wonder if he regrets it. If he thinks about the river he used to fish in or the family he might never see again. But other times, I see him with Zito, laughing as the ship sways beneath them, and I think maybe he's found his home after all. Still, the sea never forgets. And neither does the past. With her support and the respect he earned from the crew for his hard work, he rose in the ship's hierarchy, eventually becoming a trusted caretaker for the ship's dogs and later an assistant to the captain. Though he had found a new life and purpose on the sea, a part of him always carried the ache of the family and land he had lost. It was pure chance that his sister boarded the same ship years later. She had been searching for him ever since the day he disappeared, clinging to the hope that he was alive. As she helped carry her goods onto the ship, she noticed the man walking with the crew, tall, with a weathered face but unmistakable eyes. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Could it really be him? She called his name softly at first, afraid to believe. But when he turned toward her, his face filled with shock and tears. "Rose," he whispered, and in that moment, years of pain and separation melted away. The siblings embraced tightly, both crying as the crew and passengers watched in silence. She told him about the family, how their parents had grown old waiting for his return, how the village had mourned but never forgotten him. He introduced her to his wife, Zito, and their two small children, who stared wide-eyed at the stranger claiming to be their aunt. Rose pleaded with him to come home, to see their parents before it was too late. For the first time in years, the pull of his homeland became stronger than the sea. He approached the captain, who had become more like a father to him, and requested permission to leave. The captain, though reluctant, understood. Together with Zito and their children, he packed what little they had and followed his sister off the ship. The journey back to his village was long and emotional. But when he finally stepped onto the familiar soil and saw his aging parents waiting at the edge of the village, he knew he had made the right choice. Surrounded by his family, both old and new, he finally felt complete, like a part of him that had been missing for so long was finally restored.